Hi, I'm Josh McGrath.
I'm Andrew Haas.
And this is the Ardent Pursuit Podcast. Welcome back to part 2 of Men Are Called to Lead Romantic Relationships. In our last episode, we explored how men are called to bring order, to establish order in a romantic relationship. And we examined 5 areas specifically dealing with establishing order. These areas were communication, expectations, vision and purpose, emotions, and purity. Now, in the second part here, we are going to look at how a man maintains that established order in a romantic relationship. So let's dive in. All right, Andrew, maintaining order.
The big idea here is that men will generally struggle to maintain order in their life. Mm-hmm. For most people, it's hard to maintain order over the long time horizon. And we see this in, other areas. Think of working out.
Yeah.
Think of eating well. You can think of study groups. These all involve other people in your sphere.
Yeah, it's so true. I think about for myself, how many times have I said, I'm going to the gym and I'm going to work out? And then 3 months later, I'm really struggling to maintain that consistency. It gets really hard. And that's sort of a human trait. For most people, they do struggle to maintain things consistently over a long period of time.
Yeah, and it's natural to involve people. If you want to see success in a certain area, it's natural to invite someone in. Hey, help me do this better.
Sure. So the question becomes, how does a man who has really established order in a romantic relationship maintain that order over the long term? And there's probably many ways he can do it, but like last episode, we've really just identified 5 areas that we want to explore today.
Yeah. So number 1, follow through on the boundaries you've set. You want to have boundaries articulated, whether that's written down or you've talked to somebody about them, whatever that looks like, you've got to actually live them out.
Yeah.
So live by the boundaries you have in place.
Because it's not enough just to have some great ideas written down on paper when it comes to boundaries for your relationship. Like you said, you actually have to walk those out. I think about in terms of eating healthy, which you referenced earlier. Maybe someone wants to eat healthy. Well, what are the boundaries that they're going to set around that to help them maintain eating healthy? Well, maybe one of those boundaries is not going to McDonald's, because every time they go to McDonald's, they walk out of there with a 64-ounce, Shamrock Shake.
Exactly.
And so one of the things that's important is to say, well, I'm actually going to follow through on this. But one of the problems that men often have is they don't set themselves up for success within their own boundaries. They will oftentimes compromise because they have a desire for a specific kind of outcome. And so setting a man up for success means not even putting himself within the vicinity where he would fail on his boundary. Again, going back to that McDonald's example, maybe you're like, hey, I won't go there. But it's a bad idea to say, well, my friends group is hanging out there, so I'm gonna go hang out with them at McDonald's and I'm not gonna order anything. I'm like, yeah, you are, bro. You're still walking out of there with a 64-ounce Shamrock Shake.
You might not the first time, maybe not the second time, but 5, 6, 10 times down the road.
Eventually, a Shamrock Shake is accompanying you home. And that's just disaster for everybody. We know that already. All right, so number 2, keep the vision in mind. We actually talked about this in episode number 2 and the importance of having a vision for one's life. And when you think about a relationship, we know this, we've talked about this before, every romantic relationship is headed towards a decision, either covenant or not covenant. And so the goal is, why am I maintaining these things in this romantic relationship? Well, I'm maintaining them towards a specific end, either towards marriage or towards not marriage. And I've heard you say this before, one of the goals of conducting yourself well in a romantic relationship is so that should it not lead to marriage, you're leaving that relationship with the least amount of regrets possible.
And the third idea here is good leaders listen. So,
which is very hard for men to do.
Categorically, most men
generally terrible about it.
Yes, is something we struggle with.
Yeah.
But good leaders listen.
Yep.
You're going to listen to her. You're going to listen to other influential people in your life. Because this isn't just deciding what the boundaries are going to be. This isn't just deciding what things are going to look like in the relationship and moving forward with that. You've got to take input from outside people. Now, we talked about this, I think, in the last episode, where you aren't just listening to, say, her and what are her boundaries, where are her lines drawn, and saying, oh, well, this is where her comfort level is. I'll just adopt that. No, it's taking input from people ultimately, but using that to decide what's appropriate, what's healthy for our relationship.
And conversely, it's important to note that you are asking for her input all along the way. Now, like you said, her boundaries may be lower than your boundaries, so you're not going to change your boundaries to that level. However, her input, her counsel, her wisdom, her perspective is very much needed. So often, I think that people view, male leadership in this toxic, patriarchal, dictatorial, authoritarian, regime type light, where like if a man's leading, he doesn't value her, he doesn't care about her, he doesn't want to hear her opinion, or her thoughts, that she's just a slave that needs to, obey his every demand.
And to be clear, that's dictatorship. That's not leadership.
Exactly. And so healthy leadership, a healthy man, is going to invite her in, because guess what? She is different than you. That's enough to get us canceled here in 2024 to say that men and women are different. But the beauty of God's design is that women are different than men. And that is the thing that makes men attracted to women, is the fact that they are different. And so they have different perspectives. They have different viewpoints. They feel different things. They see things differently. That is needed. And a man, a good leader, should invite that in throughout the process, throughout the romantic relationship period.
Yes, we're not just relying on her. We're not just relying on other people to establish what the guidelines should be.
Yes.
You're taking input, you're evaluating, and you ultimately are going to decide with input from others what's the best way going forward.
Yes. Now, you mentioned evaluating. That's point number 4 here, which is be careful when you self-evaluate, because men inherently are terrible at judging themselves and their situations appropriately.
Categorically, we have blind spots and we're just bad at self-evaluation. We can often self-evaluate in certain areas, but on the whole, it's something that we need outside input on. Even more so when we're talking about relationships.
Yes, because when we are, we discussed this, I forget which episode this, but when we're sexually attracted to somebody, our objectivity goes out the window. We are no longer able to be objective and to view that relationship and how we're conducting ourselves in an objective manner. And this is why we need that outside counsel, why we do need that outside perspective to help hold us in check, to help us evaluate well our behaviors, our decisions throughout that process.
And the 5th point here to maintaining order in a relationship is going to involve authority and accountability, which we've talked about before, but it is such an integral part of doing this well.
One of the things about authority and accountability that I find interesting is within other parameters of life, you've mentioned working out, eating, even weight loss study and things like that. We recognize the importance and value of having that outside accountability. Now, we don't tend to use the term accountability in those areas, but that is the role that they are fulfilling. When you go to the gym and you meet your workout buddy there at 6 a.m., the reason why you've asked your workout buddy to meet you there at 6 a.m. is because guess what you don't want to do at 6 a.m.? You don't want to go to the gym. So by having that person there, that accountability, you are then showing up to the gym. You might even hire a personal trainer. And what is that personal trainer doing? They're holding you accountable to workout plans, to a duration of time that you're working out. And again, you're looking at them, you're hiring them, you're paying them money to actually hold you accountable.
Imagine a world where we pay people to hold us accountable in relationships.
I mean, that's, you want to talk about countercultural. And the thing is, people today, when you begin to talk about accountability or authority involved in a relationship, push back all the time. We see it in culture and society all the time. People are like, whoa, whoa, whoa. How dare you say I can't do this on my own? I absolutely can do it on my own. And what's so funny is so many people have a history where in their wake are broken relationships, where there's just, a plethora of dysfunction, where there are all kinds of unresolved issues because they've attempted to walk out relationships by themselves. And so they will look at something we say like involve accountability and authority, and they'll adopt that premise in other areas of their life. But when it comes to relationships, they're like, no, I've got this. Meanwhile, their entire history is fraught with dysfunction and brokenness.
We love to pick and choose. We like to say, oh, in these few areas, yeah, having a partner, a coach, or an instructor, super helpful.
Yeah.
But over here with relationships, don't need that.
And the thing that we're trying to do is actually set up men for success so that their present and future isn't full of dysfunction, isn't full of broken relationships, isn't full of drama, but is actually leading towards success, either in marriage or in remaining single. And so that's why we argue and talk so much about the importance and value of authority and accountability. Now, something that we have both heard over the years is we've walked with men who've pursued romantic relationships is the question of, well, what happens if I don't maintain a boundary that I've set up in my life? What then?
Well, first thing is talk to somebody about it. And the thing you want to recognize is that it doesn't matter how big or how small, you may have just tiptoed over the boundary you set,
sure,
or you may sprint past it.
Yep.
Doesn't matter, because what's going to happen is you become the arbiter of what matters. And that's not the goal. It's not your job to decide, is this a big deal? Is it not? No, you set up some boundaries, some parameters. You did not adhere to them. Okay, talk to somebody about it.
And we've already established that men aren't objective.
Exactly.
When they're in a romantic relationship. So them trying to decide, yeah, this isn't a big deal or this is a big deal, they're actually the wrong ones to be deciding that.
And the challenge is that if it's not a big deal, if it's like, what's the big deal? It's no big thing. Then it's easy to dismiss.
Yes.
On the other side of the spectrum, if it's a really big deal, there can be embarrassment there. You might be feeling shame. So there's a temptation either way to dismiss it.
Sure.
And that's not the point. The point isn't to decide which one is it. The point is just talk to somebody about it, no matter which it is.
I think about, one of the young men that I worked with, he had established in his relationship with his girlfriend at the time, they had decided that they weren't going to hold hands. Probably for most of our listeners, that's an insane boundary to set. But that was a boundary that he and she together felt like was going to be good for them. So I remember sitting down with him one day and he was telling me how, they had broken a boundary. And I was like, oh, okay, which one did you break? And he said, I held her hand. And it's almost funny to hear that because, again, for 99% of people, they're going to be like, holding hands, that's not a problem at all. But for him, because he had established that as a boundary in his life, crossing that line for him was a big deal.
The problem isn't holding hands.
Yes.
The problem is saying I'm not going to do it and then doing it.
Yes, exactly. And one of the things I tell men when they're in relationships is that what they're sowing in that relationship is trust with the woman. And should it lead towards marriage, they want to build a foundation of trust throughout that relationship where if they say something, then they're a man of their word. They're a man of integrity that she can rely on. Because guess what? If he says, I'm not going to hold your hand and then holds her hand, he's showing that he can't be trusted. Now, you might not think that's a big deal. Well, fast forward 5 years down the road and he's out in Las Vegas on a business trip and he says, I'm going to call you at, 11 o'clock at night, and 11 o'clock comes and goes and he hasn't called. What is she thinking at that point? Because at that moment, she's thinking about all the other times maybe he wasn't trustworthy. And so what you're actually doing within a relationship when you actually adhere and follow through on your boundaries is you're actually establishing trust. You're sowing trust into that relationship.
Yeah, this idea of men leading in relationships is really countercultural. It's almost become problematic in a lot of areas for men to show leadership.
Yeah, people see it as a problem.
And the challenge is that men leading in romantic relationships is countercultural.
Yes.
We live in a day now where men leading in many areas is considered problematic.
And that has created all kinds of issues within society, within communities, within families, within romantic relationships. Because men, instead of stepping into roles of leadership where they're needed, they're actually abdicating. They're saying, it's just easier to not deal with the drama. It's easier to not deal with the craziness that I'm going to be confronted with if I actually do try to lead. And so now they're just sitting back, waiting to be asked to lead. And you know what that's caused, what the issues are from that, is the fact that men aren't initiating romantic relationships.
You might not have the full picture of what to do moving forward, but do something and learn from there. It's this idea of certainty versus clarity. So men want certainty.
Yep.
That's fortune telling. What you can have is clarity. You can be clear on what you're going to do. You can't be certain.
Yes.
There's too many men who sit in the sideline and don't do anything because they're uncertain.
Yes, because initiation is an attribute of leadership. And so many men have bought into the cultural lie, the cultural assumption that they're not supposed to lead, therefore they don't initiate. And what has that resulted in? That's resulted in a lot of women in their 20s, 30s, 40s, and on who are single, who want to be in romantic relationships, but aren't being pursued. Why? Because no man is initiating anything with them. We see this trend on social media all the time. Women, they're posting on there kind of what they're looking for in a potential partner. So it's like, needs to make 6 figures, needs to have his house in order, needs to be well-groomed, needs to take care of his body, needs to have a good relationship with his family. And I'm like, well, those are all attributes. That's all fruit of a man who leads well. And guess what? Every guy is called to lead because he starts with leading himself. And we actually talked about this in I think episode 2, that it starts by having a vision for yourself and leading yourself before you ever will lead another person.
Yeah, you got to lead yourself well before you can lead someone else well.
And I think about the fact that, for the majority of women, they want a man who initiates, and you see this so clearly when it comes to, an intruder coming into the house at 2 a.m. And the woman isn't, upstairs being like, what, I'm going to go downstairs, girl power, I'm going to confront this intruder. No, what is she doing? She's tapping on her man and saying, you go downstairs, you check this out, and if I hear gunshots, I'll call 911.
And what's implicitly being said there is, I want to pick and choose where male leadership is good.
Yeah, you can't be picking and choosing where you want to see healthy male leadership exhibited. Either healthy male leadership is needed or it's not. This isn't a buffet where you get to choose when and where you want men to step in and lead. Any romantic relationship where men aren't establishing order, where they're not maintaining order, where they're not leading, is going to be at best somewhat dysfunctional. And at worst, trying to circumvent God's design for relationships and thereby missing out on the blessings and the benefit and the fruit, the harvest of God's plan for romantic relationships.
Order in a relationship requires leadership. Men are called to lead, but first you have to lead yourself. And the thing is, at some point, when you're married someday, if that's where you end up, you're either going to be a good leader or a bad leader, but you won't ever not be a leader.
Oh, come on. We got to put that on a shirt and throw that up in the merch store.
That'll sell.
That's going to be good. All right, so here in conclusion, there are 3 things we want you to do. Number 1, no surprise. We want you to establish authority and accountability in your life. Go back to episode 6, give that a listen to if you've got questions. Number 2, if you've ever been in a relationship, we want you to review how well you established order and then maintain that order. How would you grade yourself? Is there anything you would do differently? And finally, number 3, go back to episode 10 and look at those 5 areas that we discussed and list out for yourself what healthy leadership would look like for you in each of those 5 areas. Then sit down with either your authority or accountability, share your thoughts with them, and invite theirs. You don't need to wait until you're in a relationship to begin to establish healthy leadership patterns. You can actually start today. Well, thanks for joining us. We look forward to having you here next time on the Art and Pursuit podcast.